Hey everyone, Ed Helms here. You might know me as Andy from The Office or Stu from The Hangover, or you might know me as the co-founder of BGS. I know, I'm just as surprised as you. They let me co-found something. But here's the thing, we're doing it again. Yeah, this time we're leaping into our other deep love, the vast and vibrant world of country music, with something we're calling Good Country. Now, this isn't just another newsletter. Think of Good Country as a place. A place where you can explore, learn, and dig into all of what makes country good. Seriously, country music has so much going on these days, and it's coming from so many different deep and soulful places, and we're here to cover all of it, just as we've done for bluegrass and roots music at BGS for over a decade. So sign up now at goodcountrybgs.substack.com and let us bring you the many sides of country music straight to your inbox. Good Country. It's a nice place to be.
Hello, welcome. It's Basic Folk, where we have honest conversations with folk musicians. I'm your host, Cindy Howes. Jonatha Brooke is on the podcast today. I have always really liked Jonatha Brooke. Her songs are the best. They're sharp, joyful, and very wise, I would say. She's definitely one of those writers that basically knows what to do all the time, which is the basis for why we love pop music. Anyways, I'll talk a little bit about what we get into, but first, let's thank our sponsors for Basic Folk. Basic Folk is brought to you in part by Winterbirds. Their new album, Shaker Songs, takes 18th and 19th century sacred texts from American Shakers and puts it to all new progressive bluegrass compositions, exploring the poetry of this unique community. You can find Shaker Songs by Winterbirds on Bandcamp. Basic Folk is brought to you by motivational life coach Janet Forrest, who believes it's never too late to ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? Mention Basic Folk and you'll receive 25% off your first month of coaching when you visit janetforrest.com to get started. I also want to let you know that we're running a giveaway on Instagram right now. If you find me on Instagram, CindyHowes_ is where you can find my profile. Giving away a copy of Anna Tivel's new vinyl record, The Question. Details and everything are up on my Instagram, so check it out. All right, Jonatha Brooke, or as I like to call her, JB. In this podcast, this conversation is really special. It gets very real at times. She gives details about her upbringing in a Christian Science household. She even went to Christian Science summer camp and tells us a little bit about that. She talks about where she stands now with her religion and speak of her journey in taking care of her mother who had dementia, but it seems like she was a hysterical woman who, during one of the saddest times in Jonatha's life when her mother was passing away, they were laughing all the time. And Jonatha was inspired to create a one-woman musical out of that experience called My Mother Has Four Noses, which we also talk about. We talk about Woody Guthrie. She has an album that is entirely all songs written by Woody Guthrie. And, of course, we talk about her incredible duo, The Story, that she had with Jennifer Kimball in the late 80s, early 90s. We talk about a lot in this episode. I hope that we get to actually have another conversation with Jonatha at some point, because we, towards the end of we've been talking for 45 minutes, and towards the end of the conversation, we just hit a new topic that we could have just kept going for another 45 minutes. But Jonatha has a new EP. It's coming out April 19th, so whenever you're listening to this, it's called Imposter. And we're going to listen to the lead single on the EP called Fire, and then we'll get to our conversation with Jonatha Brooke on Basic Folk.
I've always been a pleaser 'cause it's easier to get along, carry on, sing a damn song before I tell you how I feel. But this is how I feel when I tell you that it's real, 'cause I'm hot now, you know how. I will beg, borrow, and steal. This heat is gonna save me. Fever, misbehave me. Watch it spike. You're gonna like it, 'cause I'm in the ring and I'm a knockout. So watch out, bring it.
Thanks for doing this, Jonatha Brooke.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So it's kind of weird like right now I'm sitting at a radio station that I used to work at in college where I first discovered your music, and now I work here. So it's like come full circle.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I remember that I was like very unfamiliar with your music as like a young teen, and I had a co-host on the show, and she was like very aggressive about your music, and we would play 10-cent wings, and she would sing the whole song, and it was very formidable.
Oh, I love aggressive fans.
Let's talk about your early family life, if that's all right. Yeah. Okay, cool. You grew up in Cambridge. Is that true?
Well, yeah, a little bit. Weston, then Boston. Yeah, we moved into the city when I was about 12 because I was a hardcore ballerina, and Mom got tired of driving me every single day into the city for ballet class.
So where were you studying ballet?
The Cambridge School of Ballet in Central Square.
And what got you interested in dance?
When I was 6, we were living in London, and we were there for like 2.5 years, and we had this option. I don't think, actually, we maybe didn't have the option. We were, I was at a school for girls, Francis Holland School for Girls in Sloane Square in London, and we all took ballet at the Royal Academy of Dance, and I just fell for it. I was smitten. I was just like this thing that inspired me and consumed me.
Like immediately?
Immediately, I was hardcore.
What was your family doing in England?
My dad was a journalist. He was a newspaper man. So he was the American editor for the Christian Science Monitor.
Whoa. Mm-hmm. And so what was your family like growing up? Were you the only child?
I am the youngest of 3. I have 2 older brothers.
And what was
I
it
was
like?
The baby.
What was it like growing up with your parents? What kind of parents were they like?
They were great parents. I really, especially being a little older now, imagining like parenting artsy fartsy kids and like worrying about like how will they make their way in the world, how will they make a living, how will they keep a roof over their heads. They just seemed completely comfortable with whatever any of us would choose. Like we're all teacher, writer, artsy, goofballs, and somehow we're fine, and they supported us in this really trusting way.
I want to talk about your mom quite a bit in this interview. She was a literal clown.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a side thing, but she did for 2 months. She studied clowning at the Cambridge School for Adult Education. And
this was back in Massachusetts, right?
This is back in Massachusetts, yeah. And so I think I was 12 at the time. It was right around the time we were moving into the city. And I think she was sort of casting about for some other sort of creative outlet. So she went to clown school and she created her own persona. She created her own face with the grease paint and the whole thing, like 2 months of really honing in on a character and an identity and a name and the costume. Her friend Nancy made her this polka dotted suit, and she got the big floppy shoes, and she had a bowler hat and this weird blonde curly like Harpo Marx wig, and she became Stony the Clown. So like any excuse to get into clown character, she would do it.
Why?
And I was 12. I know, it's like seventh grade isn't hard enough, right? Yeah. I think that there was this sort of performer side of her that never got let out, and it was exciting for her. And I think especially my brothers, who are older than I am, they're 6 and 8 years older than I, like they didn't have a lot of patience for Mom's quirky outbursts and her little performances of like drama or poetry. So this was a way for her to find her own little avenue of, I don't know, just some weird thing that would be her very own expression. And then the irony is that when she got Alzheimer's, she just fell even more naturally into this clownish role.
Oh, wow.
And she had sort of a built-in audience with me and the other caregivers that were caring for her.
Oh wow, yeah. I have so many questions about that time in your life. But is it okay to return? We'll return to that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about how you first came to the guitar. You got a guitar when you were 12.
Yeah, I had gone to summer camp, and there was this woman
Ooh,
named
what kind of summer camp did you go to?
It was a Christian Science summer camp.
Wow.
Yeah. But one of the counselors was named Mindy Jostin, and she sang with John Mellencamp, and she sang with the Hooters, and she was a badass. And she just, every afternoon she would like hang out and sing songs, and we would all just be like, Mindy Jostin. And she was also like super hot. So she had this like pistachio green bikini, and she got really tan. And I'm a redhead, so I'm never ever going to be tan in my life. But I was just sort of obsessed with Mindy Jostin, and I wanted to be just like her. So I just begged and begged and begged, and finally got a guitar for Christmas after that summer camp.
So I want to know more about what Christian Science summer camp is like.
Well, it's kind of like every other summer camp, except that you are everyone's a Christian Scientist. So if you stub your toe, if you have a headache, if you whatever, you pray. You don't. There's no nurse. I mean, unless there's something catastrophic, in which case I'm sure they have sort of directives as to like, okay, in the case of emergency, should we treat the kid? And then maybe they would take you to the hospital. But luckily, I didn't see any major mishaps.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Were you raised a Christian Scientist?
Yep.
Yeah. And how do you feel about that now?
I am not a Christian Scientist. Yeah, it's so complicated. I don't know if you've read the book Educated by Tara Westover. Mm-mm. It's a weird thing because I don't want to call it a cult because that's a little harsh, but it's definitely, when you're little, of course you're whatever your parents are, you're indoctrinated, in good or bad ways. And sometimes it takes a while to realize, oh, this really is not for me. I need to get out of this. But at the same time, as much as I'm pretty adamantly not a Christian Scientist, and I'm very angry about its teachings, just in terms of saving your own life if you need to, I still defend it. And that's, I think that's very typical for people. I think a lot of people would say that who've come out of very intense religious upbringings, who then leave the church. There's still this really complicated relationship to defending it, and yet being super critical of it and not wanting any part of it anymore.
Well, yeah, it's got to be tough if people that you love are still following the doctrine.
And suffering. I think that I witnessed so much suffering as a child in my family, in particular, both my parents, and it instilled such a sense of helplessness. And then as I found medicine myself, and as I dealt with my own physical whatever happened, through doctors, who I love, it brought up this rage of like, how could you, my mom in particular for 20 years had this skin cancer that went unchecked because she was absolutely convinced that she would be healed through Christian Science, through prayer. And, growing up that way, I was like, okay, Mom, I'm with you. I'm rooting for you. And then after 20 years, it was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. This is an emergency. There was nothing left of her face. And finally she sought medical treatment. And it's something that now that I know, having been to the dermatologist, it would have been a 5-minute session and they would have just taken off a tiny mole and it would have been fine.
Wow.
So that, I witnessed so much of that I really struggle with my anger about it. and especially caring for her through those medical emergencies, like being the one to step up and say, okay, I got you, Mom. Come live with me. We'll deal with this.
Wow.
Was that a little heavy for early in the morning?
It was perfect.
Well, that's why this show, my one-woman show, is called My Mother Has Four Noses, because it's literally, she had 4 prosthetic noses after they fixed her up. Like, there was nothing left to work with, so they had to make her a prosthetic nose, and when they do that, they make you 4.
Were they all the same noses?
They're exactly the same.
Was one a clown nose?
Design. I know she was actually she had such a great sense of humor about it. And that was the most beautiful thing about my mom's spirit. She would joke with the maxillofacial surgeon and with the reconstructive woman who was a goddess. Like, well, can you make me a red one too? But no, they made her 4. They're all the same exact pattern, but she pigmented each of them differently. It's like fine art. They draw in like pores and little red veiny things so they look natural. And then some are lighter and some are, 2 of them are a little lighter and 2 of them are a little darker.
So when you were taking care of your mom and she got Alzheimer's and dementia, I'm interested in how that affected her faith.
That is a brilliant question. It still makes me emotional after 6, 7 years. It took it away. It disappeared. Like, you would think that something that ingrained, because with Alzheimer's, often it's the very early memories that you retain till the last stages. Early, like the songs you learn as a kid, you can still recall them. Smells and poetry and those sort of early things. For my mom, the very thing that just provided her such solace and was her sustenance for so many years just disappeared, and nothing could comfort her. Not the hymns that she used to love to sing, not reading her the Bible, not reading her The Science and Health, which is the textbook of Christian Science. And it was devastating. And most of her sort of Christian Science friends abandoned her too. And that was another source of deep sadness for me, because the second that she wasn't really able to pray or practice Christian Science, the people that had worked with her as a Christian Scientist just disappeared. They were like, well, she's not really able to pray anymore, and she's taking medicine now, so we're not on the same page.
Wow.
It was brutal, and it was brutal.
Did she understand that was happening, that the people of her faith had left?
I think at that point it was luckily a pivot that she was far enough advanced with the dementia that it wasn't specific to her. It's just that she couldn't find this one person. And she would call her like 20 times a day until we had to unplug the phone. And then start creating other stories around where this person was. And then luckily it was like a month-long period of great turmoil and anguish. And then something else took its place, which was, because there's a sort of OCD component to Alzheimer's sometimes. Mm-hmm. So we just kept trying to find other things for her to fixate on. And it was her poetry and the LL Bean catalog. And
well, I can relate to that.
And ice cream. And so we just sort of would find other things that seemed to spark her interest and her playfulness and her clown character, basically. And we just tried to sort of meet her there and enhance that.
It's interesting that you say that when somebody gets dementia, they remain, like, their first, like, visceral memories remain, and, like, the the core of their personality remains. So what did you learn about your mom's personality as her dementia advanced? I think I'm particularly interested in about like her silliness and her humor.
Well, that was the beauty of it, because you'll hear some stories that aren't as positive. I mean, it's devastating, it's complicated, and it's awful at the end. So I don't want to sugarcoat the disease. But some people, the person that surfaces is not so lovely, and they can be angry and violent in a person that has been, kind and generous all their lives. So we were lucky in that Mom's core person, her core qualities were just awesome. This childlikeness surfaced, and silliness, and generosity, and love. And she was always like more concerned about us than for herself. She'd always be so worried that there was going to be enough ice cream for everyone else, or, oh, sweetheart, aren't you cold? Or I had this one pair of jeans that was, I paid a ton of money for them, and they had holes all over them, and they were like super distressed and like really cool. But my mom would just be like, oh, sweetheart, can't we get you some jeans that don't have holes in them? Like, let's look in the LL Bean catalog. I'm sure we can find you some jeans there. And I'd just be like, oh, Mom, that is the best. That's the sweetest thing.
Yeah, just a quick aside. My grandfather had dementia. He passed away when he was like 92. This was over 10 years ago. But he was very like emotionally distant my whole life. But when he got dementia, he turned into like the most sweet, like the most kind, like sweetest, like kissing. Every time he saw us, he would like kiss us and just be very friendly and happy to see us. Isn't
it strange?
Yeah.
Mom actually, that's another thing. She became much more physical, like physically comfortable, and she loved holding hands, and she loved to be touched, and she loved it when you would put this beautiful, yummy smelling cocoa butter lotion. The smells were important, like aromatherapy. Like, don't diss it. It really, like, having great smells around was very comforting to her, and the sense of touch became much more sacred and intimate in just the loveliest way.
Yeah, that sounds so nice.
Yeah,
it's good. That's good to hold on to that type of goodness.
Yeah, because it is hard, especially over a long period. I'm sure, I don't know how long your grandfather was sort of less than present, but it's hard to remember the other person, the normal person after a while. I still have trouble conjuring, so-called normal mom,
Yeah, totally. So let's go back. So you formed the Story with Jennifer Kimball at Amherst College. You two met while auditioning for an a cappella group. Can you talk about the harmonies that you were drawn to at that time, and what it was maybe like when you and Jennifer first sang together?
We were both, we got into this a cappella group because our blend was it was really deep, like how our voices blended. We were both sopranos, and I have a more sort of, if you can and sort of picture it as like a dagger, my voice is more pointed than hers, and she has this gorgeous velvety, rounder tone. So the two of us together created this beautiful blend. So we mostly kind of hit it off as pals because we had the same sense of humor, and we were kind of irreverent and a little bit cynical about this a cappella group. And we started, we would always want to add these weird dissonant notes into the arrangements, and we'd get shot down. And we would always find ourselves singing along in the car to like pop songs of the time, and we would always end up on the weirdest harmony note together, and we'd like, wait, that's my note. And so we had this great affinity for this dissonant thing that we were both drawn to. So she was the perfect foil. And so sophomore year I started writing songs, and we started performing them together. We first called ourselves Jonatha and Jennifer, and then it was after college that we're like, this is a little bit twee. We can't, maybe this is not going to be a lasting kind of name. So I came up with the story.
So when I was listening to the story last night, I just had this like striking moment of how incredible the sounds and the themes that you and Jennifer were making and covering were not like just incredible they were, but also how they were not in vogue at the time. But there, of course, was a desire for it. You got signed to a major label. And then there's also groups from the past. I'm thinking like the Roaches. And I don't know if you're familiar with this younger group, Mountain Man.
No.
That kind of have this like gentle, dissonant, harmony-driven music that is like similar to the story and similar to the Roaches, that they were about like the pretty brave subjects by brave young people. So I don't know, like I was trying to think of like how can I formulate that thought into a question, but maybe like how do you feel about that type of sound you were creating at that time? In some ways you were like trailblazing for songwriters in the 1990s, like particularly I'm thinking like musicians like Tori Amos. She was doing some pretty crazy stuff in the 90s that you and Jennifer were doing like in 1989.
Yeah, well, thank you. That, I mean, I take that as a really great compliment. And I have to say that you hit it on the head with the Roach Sisters. I think you could probably hear almost as much of them in our early, in the story records as anything, just because of that gleeful, dissonant thing that, the rubbing of those notes and the close harmonies. We were a little more poppy, and arranged and produced than they were. So they were a big inspiration. And I guess it was what was awesome about the story and Jennifer and me was that we didn't really have a sense of, you don't think about that at the time. You don't think about like, ooh, we're breaking new ground. We're gonna kick, pop music's ass on its head. It's more like, oh my God, someone just gave us $250,000 to make a record. Let's go have some fucking fun. Let's go rock this thing. And that was what was so exciting, was to be in this playground of, you can do whatever you want. You've got like a month in a fancy pants studio. You can call all your favorite musicians and see what happens. And you have like as many vocal tracks as you want. So you can do like 15 harmonies, yay. So it was just kind of like, wow, this is really cool. These are the things that are I'm thinking about right now, and this is what I want to say, and let's just see what happens. And so I guess it just sort of felt like we were still finding our sound, so we were just lucky, I guess. It's always luck and
Totally.
Timing.
Yeah. So not to like just like jump around all over the place, but after the story, you had like such a wild career, and I think like the 90s in general were such a weird time for music, and you rode through it. You did well in the early also, and into the early 2000s, where like everything, like compared to the 90s, it was like far more weird and bizarre, and everything kind of like blew up in the business. How do you reflect on that crazy amounts of change in the industry that you've seen over the years? Like, did you ever want to quit? Was there something that was constantly driving you throughout that?
Wow, these are such great questions, I have to say.
Thank you.
It is amazing to look back over the 90s into the 2000s and the major label deals. I had 4 major label records, and then I've made, I think, 9 now on my own label. And the constant recalibrating, I think that's what the real sort of test of your mettle is. Like, number one, do you have to do this no matter what? Answer, yes. This is what I do. This is what feeds me. I love making records. I love writing songs. I love touring. And then the reality of it is like, can I afford to do this? Because at a certain point, you are on your own. It happens to almost every artist. It's, the 0.1% that stays on top and is making great money for their careers. It's like, you really have to recalibrate almost for each record. Like, okay, how am I doing? Can I still do this without, wanting to kill myself? How will I pay for it? And how do I define success? What's enough for me?
Yeah, you definitely seem to be an artist who is very agile when it comes to the business model of this weird music industry that we found ourselves in. I think on the flip side of that, I'm interested in knowing, you were just talking about like your definition of success. So financial success or, able to pay the bills, that's one thing. But what about the struggle with like being enough for yourself?
Yeah, that's an ego thing, really. And I think that there are times when I've struggled because I sort of feel like, oh my God, this is the one. Like 10-Cent Wings was the record for me that I thought was like, this is my masterpiece. Like this, I'll kill myself if this thing doesn't reach a wider audience. And then of course there was a regime change at the label, and right when Secrets and Lies was starting to rise the charts at AAA radio, they dropped me. So like between a Friday, I was on tour, between a Friday and the next Monday, they like called all the radio stations and were like, don't play this anymore. We're moving on to, I don't know, Jackson Browne or whoever. So it was like this brutal, like, wait a minute, we were starting to have some success with this, and this record is awesome, and I'm done.
So mundane.
Yeah, and that's when you're like, oh my God, like, that is just so dumb of them. Like, I've got this track record. I've built this fan base. I sold 100 and whatever thousand records on the last thing. Like, what are you thinking? Like, have you heard of artist development? And like, we were charting. Is this like a vindictive thing? What the hell? You don't like me? So once you get over that, it's like, you grow up and you're like, all right, it's not necessarily about me. It's not about the music even. It's like, okay, what's enough? I just have to make great music. And I'm so thrilled year after year that I find out all the people that know who I am, and they sort of come out of the woodwork, and I'm like, oh my God, that's really cool. So I guess it's just, the respect of your peers, doing great work, not being an asshole so that you're not burning any bridges along the way. I mean, that's like my one. What kind of advice do you have for people just starting out? Like, don't be an asshole, basically, because it's a very small world and you need every friend that you can find.
I feel like somebody needs to write a book about like between like 1996 and like 2004, the amount of artists that just sort of like fell through like industry bureaucracy, like yourself, Patty Griffin, and Poe. Those three names come to mind immediately, and there must be like so many more that just were completely and utterly just screwed.
Totally. There's, hundreds. And then it's interesting. A lot of people, sort of what I would call the middle class of artists. A lot of them are just like, all right, see ya. I'm going back to school. I got to do something else. This is too, like Katie Curtis. On a different level, but Katie Curtis and other people are just like, this is just too hard.
Yeah.
It's just too hard. And I've got a family now,
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about our boyfriend, Woody Guthrie. So The Works is the album where you get to go into the Woody Guthrie archives and select songs that were never recorded before. First of all, like, what were the archives like physically like? Like, I'm imagining like a bank vault.
A little bit, yeah. It was like a 3-room office suite in a building on 57th Street in New York. And one room was like the Tiffany's room, the overseer, I don't want to call her secretary. She was like assistant to Nora Guthrie, the daughter. one was Nora's office, and then the third room was a bigger room with those huge sliding like metal file cabinets, but floor to ceiling. So not a big place, but someone had come in and completely organized the whole thing. I think it was like in the attic in Nora's house in like Kisco or something.
Yeah.
And someone came in and organized every single thing and photographed it and documented it and archived it. So it was just this one big room with a big table, and then you would put on these white cotton gloves, and you were given a tiny silver spatula, like a tiny little poker thing, almost like a dentist tool, so that you would turn the pages with that rather than risk,
The oil.
dog-earing them
Yeah.
by mistake, or the oil of your skin. So you'd like turn them with a little spatula, and you'd have your little white cotton gloves, and you'd like I went there for almost 2 weeks straight, almost like a straight job. And I just looked through, and then I would request, like, I want this one, this one, this one, this one. And they would send me JPEGs of those pages that I had requested. And then I meddled with them until the record came out.
Were you the first woman songwriter to look through the archives like this?
I think I might have been the first woman, like, given that full-fledged access and the trust of, I had her complete confidence, and she was just like, go for it, do what you got to do, because don't worry about Woody, he's going to be fine. This should be about you. This is your record, and it's going to be beautiful. And she was really drawn to this first song that I'd written, which was sort of like a little test run for a benefit concert, and we really hit it off after that. She's like, okay, let's go. I think maybe someone had come in, I don't know if it was Cheryl Wheeler or another sort of folk artist might have come in, another woman, to do like a one-off. But I think that I was the first that wanted to do a full. I mean, there was Wilco and Billy Bragg that did those two records, but I was the first girl to do a full record.
You brought out this very tender and loving side of Woody on that record that I think hadn't really been seen before, and I wonder if that was intentional, or if if it impacted your search to know that you were maybe the first woman searching through these archives. Or maybe I'm shooting blanks here.
No, not at all. I mean, I don't think it was conscious. It was what I was drawn to and surprised by. Because I found these like gorgeous love poems and these things that he'd written from a woman's perspective. Like, I didn't even have to change the gender of the poetry. So it was more like, oh my God, this is here too. It's not just, political songs or, even kids songs. It was like, oh my God, this guy has so many facets. I'm so drawn to this one because no one knows about this side. So it was more like, what I responded to was just, I get this little twitter in my tummy, and I'm like, okay, that must be for me.
That's so cool. So you found some like pretty bizarre stuff in there as well, that you've talked about in interviews past, but all encompassing. How did getting to know Woody Guthrie through this process change you, and in what ways did you most connect with him?
It changed me because I think his example was, he was so fearless. And I witnessed that in like seeing all of this. They saved everything. So there was stuff on napkins. There was weird stuff he typed on wrapping paper. There was hotel stationery. There was things that he had painted in a sketchbook and then written over. It was his fearlessness that really changed me and inspired me, because it made me less precious about my own process, because I get pretty damn precious and pretty damn paranoid. And so it was this really painless process, and it felt like he was in the room with me collaborating. It felt like he was on my shoulder going, come on, man, let's do this thing. That was wicked inspiring.
I love your use of the word precious. I notice you use it like throughout your career. You've used it quite a bit in interviews, just to talk about like how your process is as a songwriter. So I'm really happy that you brought it up in this interview too.
It's funny. Yeah. Precious is it has such a range of meaning for me. One of the women that helped me take care of Mom was from Jamaica, and she used that word in the most beautiful way. Like she'd say, "Oh, my precious, how are you doing today, my precious?" And so it's like this twofold thing. Like now to me, it's a sacred word as well as the way I define myself when I'm sucking.
So Imposter is your new EP, which the cover of the EP that's real. It's you playing a bass drum with no clothes in the middle of the street.
Yeah, I just took a real leap. I had this idea and then I did it, and I'm like, screw it. I'm going for it.
It's great. You have a very pop-centric mentality, like a very bright personality to, I think, not that I know you personally, but just viewing you over the years, your sense of style, the way you are in interviews, you're very bright.
Oh, thanks.
But
it's ironic.
There is this like depth and sophistication that you capture so elegantly in your music and in your personality. Do you see that duality, and how do you work with those two sides of yourself and your music?
Oh my God, you're wicked. You're so fucking smart.
Thank you.
This is the best. I swear to God, like, no, these are incredible questions. It's like I'm getting emotional.
Oh.
I guess it's like, can you ask it again? That's such a like the fashion and like pop sensibility, but also having a depth of sentiment. I guess, okay, so maybe it's like the religion has probably influenced that, and my love for literature and poetry. I am my mother's daughter. She was obsessed with poetry, and she was a poet. And I'm deeply emotional, and I think that I write when I'm emotional, and I think that I try to get at deeply emotional things and complicated things, and sometimes I get it right, and I hit the emotional nail on the head, and it becomes maybe a detailed, faceted expression, but it's also universal. A song like Because I Told You So, that's one where I got it. And even So Much Mine, which is complicated. It's a story song. It's a complicated song. It's complicated harmonically, and there's counterpoint. But the sentiment gets at this very deep, complex relationship that is universal, mothers and daughters, and that struggle. On the other side, I'm a pop songwriter. I love a great hook. I love a chorus that just gets in your head and is singable and happening. And I guess because I was a dancer, I've always sort of been in my body and liked nice clothes and like feeling funky and looking good. And so I guess my image has been, I'm conscious and I'm vain enough, I guess, that I want to look good too. And that's a really interesting transition now that we could do a whole other interview about, is like, that watching yourself age and suddenly being like a very different, like invisible in a way that you never were until suddenly you are invisible. And there's a power in it. And there's also a very interesting thing you have to make your peace with. It's another recalibration. So there's the artistic recalibration, then there's like the being a woman and being 55 recalibration of like, who am I now, and am I good with this, and how am I going to be comfortable in my skin, because this other sense of power that I had around my physicality is not kind of part of my arsenal anymore necessarily. That sounds weird, but
no, it makes sense.
But it's super freeing too, because I'm not trying to be the cutest girl in the room. I don't give a shit, because that's what Fire is about. The song Fire on the new record is about like, all right, I got this, because I don't need you to like my ass anymore. I'm not really worried about that. I want you to listen.
Yeah. So in looking back on, coming of age as an artist in the 90s, was it a struggle to negotiate with the perception of either of those sides? So it seems like back in the 90s, and maybe forever, it seems like women could do no right. You were either like the whore or you were the shrew. Do you feel that? And what was your experience there?
I think earlier I was insecure enough to just want to be pretty.
It just doesn't that take up so much of your time?
It's so exhausting. It's so exhausting and so dumb. And at the same time that I was sort of probably publicly, militantly like, I don't give a shit. Of course I did. Of course I did. I wanted to be pretty in the pictures, and I wanted to look cute in my little weird, some of the pictures, some of the shit I wore back in the story, like Jennifer and I would just be mortified to see some of it. But it's just so hard. It's heady and it's complicated, and just being female is so complicated because it is so much about other people's gaze and how you are perceived, and you are the person that is imposing that gaze on yourself. We're taught that. We're grown that way to like always be conscious of how other people are seeing us. I think that's a book I read in college, Ways of Seeing, the John Berger book, or is it Berger, where he really gets specific about like it's a very female thing to be, number one, seeing the world, but also always conscious of how the world is seeing you. And it's wicked hard. I don't think I answered the question, but
no, but we definitely have cracked into another topic that we'll have to cover in part 2.
Yeah, I hope we can have a part 2.
Yeah, me too. Well, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Likewise. I so appreciate this conversation, honestly.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God, what a woman. I can honestly say after that conversation, like, I started this podcast saying that I really liked Jonatha Brooke and I've always really liked her music, but like after speaking with her, I'm like really into Jonatha Brooke. I love her. I think she's an incredible human being. So happy that she was able to come on the podcast. And again, her new EP, Imposter, you can check it out, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your music. You could even buy it. Once again, let's thank our sponsors for Basic Folk. Basic Folk is supported by Tina and Her Pony. If you like fresh takes on traditional music, you might like Tina and Her Pony. Follow them on Spotify or at Tina and Her Pony. On Basic Folk, you hear honest conversations about how artists are journeying from point A to B. If you could use support and motivation on your journey, life coach Janet Forrest is there for you. Visit janetforrest.com and mention Basic Folk and you'll receive 25% off your first month of coaching. And thanks to WIUP in Indiana, Pennsylvania, which airs Basic Folk 2 p.m. Eastern every Saturday. You can listen on 90.1 if you're in the Indiana, PA area, or at their website, wiupfm.org. Laura McCarthy produces Basic Folk. Lindsay Myers is our business manager. Alex Stanton of Townspeople does our music. I'm Cindy Howes. I host this podcast. Also, you can go to my website, cindyhowes.net, sign up for the Basic Folk newsletter that you'll get once a week with just wonderful whimsical quips about the guests on Basic Folk and, whatever I feel like telling you about. There's also a new Facebook group with 300 members, which is awesome. I post pictures of my cat and ask you questions about your favorite music. I would be so honored if you could join us on Facebook for Basic Folk Basics. And that's about the sum of it. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week. Okay, bye.